What's going on, guys? This is Andre here with the Kevin Breeze channel, and this is pros and cons for the Samsung Galaxy A52 5G. Today, I'm going to be going over some of the best and worst things about this phone. Let's get started. So my first pro for this phone is the display. I was impressed by the display of the regular A52, but the A52 5G is even better. So this phone has a 6.5-inch, 120Hz Super AMOLED display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 407, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and a screen-to-body ratio of 84.1%. The regular A52 has a 90Hz display, which is really impressive already, but this one kicks it up a notch with 120Hz, and you can just tell by scrolling through everything that it is really fast. This is going to be really good for stuff like content consumption or high performance gaming, where you see lots of motion on the screen. It really does help to make that a little bit smoother. In addition to that, just like the regular A52, this phone has a Super AMOLED display with a really high resolution. So overall, it makes for a really good experience, whether you're doing content consumption or gaming or even reading or photo editing. My next pro for this phone is the storage. Now, depending on the variant you get, this phone's either going to come with 128 gigabytes or 256, but either way, it's going to be a lot of storage, most likely more than you need. And with things getting larger and larger, whether it's the system or an app, you name it, everything is getting bigger these days. And because of that, you're going to need a lot more storage. And it's better to have more than you think you need. Some people, in fact, most people are really only going to need like 64, but having double that is a really good safety padding just to make sure you don't actually have to use a micro SD card. And even if you do, you actually can, unlike a phone like the iPhone. So if you have a lot of photos and videos, you can do that as well. My next pro for this phone is that it has NFC. NFC is the technology behind Google Pay and Samsung Pay and all of that, and it's becoming more and more popular these days. It's a really nice contactless way to pay that's super convenient as well, and having it on this phone is a really nice thing, especially considering a couple years ago that was only something you would see on flagship phones, and now this phone has it too, which is really nice. My next pro for the phone is the camera. This phone in pretty much every way has a really great camera. On the front here, we got the hole punch front-facing camera that's 32 megapixels. And this camera not only looks nice, but also takes really good quality photos as well. On the back here, there's a 64 megapixel rear camera, a 12 megapixel ultra-wide camera, a 5 megapixel depth sensing camera, and a 5 megapixel macro camera. I'm not too crazy about the macro camera, but it's still there, and for all intents and purposes, this phone has pretty much any camera feature you could ask for. This picture was taken with the rear camera of the phone, and as you can see, it's a really high quality picture. Not only is the sharpness and general quality really good, but it also has really vivid colors and really nice looking shadows. Overall, it's not just a high quality picture, it has a lot of little details that most mid-level phones like this don't have. Now, I'm not quite a photographer myself, but I do hear of people using smartphones for photography instead of taking pictures for fun. These people are actually using their phones to take actual pictures that they use for a professional purpose. And I think that this phone can actually be used for that. Usually you'll see them use something like an iPhone or a Samsung Galaxy S series of some sort. But really, this phone seems like it would be completely fine for that purpose if you really wanted to use it for that. And this phone not only has great photos, but the video quality is going to be just as good. With this device, you can shoot 4K videos in not only the rear, but also the front-facing camera as well. So overall, if content creation like photos and videos, that sort of thing, is going to be one of your main purposes of your device, this is definitely not going to be a bad option. My last pro for this phone is that it has dust and water resistance. This is something that I haven't seen in a lot of phones that aren't super high-end or flagship phones. So I was actually really excited to find out that this phone has water resistance for up to 1 meter for 30 minutes. If you're in a more rough environment where there's lots of dust, if it rains a lot and you're outside, whatever the case may be, it's nice to have this extra protection to go along with all the other features this phone has. Now, my first con for this phone is that the processor could be better. This phone has the Qualcomm Snapdragon 750G processor and depending on the variant, you're going to be getting either 6 or 8 gigabytes of RAM. We ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on the phone, and it came back with a single core score of 647 and a multi-core score of 1939, which in itself really isn't that bad, but considering its predecessor, the Samsung Galaxy A51 5G, had a multi-core score around 816, that's really not going to do anything. It might be a tiny bit faster, and if you get the variant that has 8 gigabytes of RAM, it's going to help it handle those programs and activities that are a little bit more taxing on the processor, but other than that, it's really not going to do that much else. Overall, the processor isn't really bad, but I wouldn't really say I'm impressed either. It definitely could be better. My next con for this phone is the materials. Now, even though the phone looks nice, it doesn't really feel very premium at all. The back is made of some sort of plastic. It's pretty much made of plastic all around, and it doesn't feel premium at all. If they added maybe a little bit of metal to the sides, it would feel a lot better. And since this phone does have a lot of more premium features, I think that having better materials would make a big difference. My next con for this phone is that it's pretty thick, especially even compared to its predecessor. The design is really nice, don't get me wrong, but this phone does seem like it should be thinner than it is. It doesn't necessarily have to be thinner than the A51, but at the same time, this is just so much thicker. I don't really know why they went this direction when they could have just left it as it was or made it even more sleek. For reference, I got the A51 5G here, and as you can see, the difference isn't huge, but it is there. I feel like if anything, they should have made this phone a little bit thinner, because the A51 5G, for that matter, is a little bit thicker than the regular A51, so I feel like they should have gone in the other direction. Now, my next con for this phone is the battery could be better. This phone has a 4500 milliamp hour battery that supports 25 watt fast charging, and that is not bad in and of itself, but this phone is a 5G phone that has a more powerful processor than the A52, so with that logic, it's gonna be eating up more energy anyway, and plus, the A72, the phone that's just a tiny step higher than the A52, does have a 5000 milliamp hour battery, and technically being the 5G variant of the A52, this phone should be a step above both of them, so I don't really know why they didn't just give this phone the full 5000 milliamp hour battery, instead of sticking it with the one that's slightly smaller. My guess is that when the A72 5G does come out, it's going to have a 5000 milliamp hour battery, but the difference is so small, I don't see why all of them couldn't have had the same, because that is pretty much the biggest battery out there, and these phones are really nice phones, so I would think that having that extra 500 milliamp hours would make a good difference. My last con for this phone is the macro camera. As I mentioned before, I'm really not a big fan of the macro camera. I think it's kind of useless, especially considering the Samsung Galaxy A72 has a telephoto lens. Now granted, that phone also has a macro camera, which I again think is pretty useless, but at least it has a telephoto lens, and the telephoto lens can do basically the same thing a macro camera can do, but it also has more functions, whereas a macro camera only has one function that's really rarely used. I haven't personally seen or heard of anyone actually using the macro camera, whereas with a telephoto lens, you can capture pictures from far away and still get that good quality, which I think is a lot cooler. Since the A52 5G is the 5G variant that's supposed to be a little bit nicer than the regular variant of the phone, I would think that it would have at least a couple extra features that would make it more worth it. But this is pros and cons for the Samsung Galaxy A52 5G. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and hopefully you found some of the points in the video helpful. If you did, be sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe, and as always, I'll see you guys in the next video.